April 14, 1912, history was forever changed when the RMS Titanic collided with an iceberg and killed 1,501 people, more than two-thirds of the passengers and crew on the ship. This tragedy certainly left its mark on the world and inspired adaptations such as James Cameron's iconic 1997 film starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet. The film Titanic tells the fictional story of Jack and Rose as they meet and quickly fall in love on the ship. However, all this is changed when, spoiler alert, Jack faces an untimely death when the Titanic sinks. Over the years, Jack's death in Titanic has been a very controversial topic. Hopeless romantics refuse to accept that Jack's death was plausible and claim that he could have somehow survived. After completing extensive research on both sides of this debate, I have reached the conclusion that not only is Jack's death essential to the movie's plot, it's also true to life. Today, I will be arguing that the scene showing Jack's death in the 1997 Titanic film was indeed plausible because of the physics involving the door Rose was floating on, as well as Jack's hypothermic and love-struck state. Before I begin, I'm going to start by explaining the scene that I'm going to be analyzing. Soon after the Titanic hit the iceberg and began to sink, Jack and Rose plunged into the freezing cold water. Luckily, they managed to spot a large wooden door floating in the water. Jack allows Rose, who has a life vest, to lay on this wooden door while he remains submerged in the water, holding her hand. As the scene progresses, Jack's health rapidly deteriorates. His skin pales, his hair becomes covered in frost, he starts shivering uncontrollably, and his breathing becomes shallow and ragged. Though he is clearly dying, Jack still tries to make light of the situation and instills a sense of hope in Rose. As his final words, Jack implores Rose to survive and live on. Rose responds with the iconic line, "I will never let go, Jack." The heartbreaking scene ends when a lifeboat returns to the wreckage to look for survivors, and Rose has to let go of Jack, causing his body to sink in the water. First, I'm going to be discussing the physical factors that prevent Jack's survival in Titanic. Jack's death was plausible because, based on the laws of physics, the wooden door could not have supported both of them without some unreasonable alterations. In an article from Time magazine, Megan McCluskey shares a series of viral photos in which two fans suggest ways that Jack and Rose could have laid to both fit on the door and survive. However, I'm going to argue that even if they could have both theoretically fit on the same door, they still would not have survived. In an article from Smithsonian Magazine, Rose Evelth includes some information from James Cameron, the director, who has consistently explained that the problem wasn't the space on the raft, but its buoyancy. So even if Jack did climb on the door with Rose, their combined weight would have caused them both to sink and die. In 2012, Mythbusters found that if you tied Rose's life vest to the bottom of the wooden door from Titanic, they both would have been able to stay afloat. Many fans use these findings to argue that Jack's death could have been avoided. But I contend that the Mythbusters failed to take into account the freezing conditions Jack and Rose were actually faced with. To tie the life vest to the bottom of the wooden door, Jack would probably have to swim underneath it, which would really reduce the chances of survival. In an article from Medical Daily, Lesia Bushak asserts that dunking your head underwater will speed up the hypothermia process. Next, I'm going to talk about some of the medical and psychological factors that contribute to the realistic nature of Jack's death. Jack's death was plausible due to his inability to think rationally as a result of his hypothermia and love for Rose. Some people, like Neil deGrasse Tyson, think that Jack's death in Titanic was unrealistic because of his lack of survival instinct. However, I think these people fail to actually consider the traumatic conditions that Jack was forced to endure. In a record of the actual sinking of the Titanic, the water was found to be 35 degrees Fahrenheit. Based on these conditions, hypothermia would set in for anyone after about 15 minutes of exposure. And hypothermia really affects the brain. Some symptoms include confusion, memory loss, and a lack of self-awareness. Jack's instincts to preserve himself and his own life were also impaired because of his love of Rose. From the scene, it's very clear that Jack would rather die than risk harming Rose in any way. This is actually consistent with the events that happened on the actual sinking of the historical Titanic. People on the Titanic actually conformed to social norms as they helped women and children first and didn't really exhibit any selfish behavior. In his study, The Neurobiology of Love, S. Zecchi asserts that when we look at pictures of people we love, it actually decreases the activity of the amygdala of the brain, which implies a lessening of fear. So, when Jack was looking at Rose in the water, it could be said that he wasn't really fully aware of the extent of the danger he was in. A combination of these factors would make it nearly impossible for Jack to come up with some ingenious way to save himself and Rose, as many people claim he could have or should have done. In light of all the information I just presented to you, it should be very clear that Jack's death is definitely plausible. The scene of Jack's death in Titanic was realistic because of the physical qualities of the wooden door, as well as Jack's compromised mental state. Although the movie was first released over 20 years ago, debates about the plausibility of Jack's death still occur today. This is incredibly reflective of the continued relevance and cultural impact of the Titanic on the contemporary world. On April 14, 1912, we lost 1,501 innocent lives at the hands of a terrible tragedy. From this day forward, life was never the same. Thank you.